if you're thinking about what you need to do for prose analysis, the biggest thing is that you need to write a thesis. But what you guys usually forget is that this should be a thematic thesis. Your thesis should always talk about the theme. So even if the prompt doesn't say anything about the theme, your thesis needs to mention or discuss theme in some way. So like, oh shoot, I lost the whiteboard. Where is it? Okay, so let's say this is your prompt. So this is why I say give yourself like a good 3 minutes with the prompt, because, you don't need to use that 3 minutes if you don't want to, but 3 minutes is helpful because that includes panic time. So you give yourself about 1 minute panic time and then, 2 minutes there. So read carefully the following passage from this novel. Write a well-organized essay in which you analyze how Trumbo uses techniques, such as point of view, selection of detail, and syntax to characterize the relationship between the young man and his father. So let's assume that this is the information you get in your prompt, because this is an old AP prompt. Then really what you should be focusing on is that this relationship between the young man and the father, that's the theme. There's something about their relationship that's the theme of the passage. So after you read it, you'd be able to write a thesis statement. And while, yeah, you should talk about point of view and syntax or whatever, the most important thing is that it needs to connect back to a theme. So the reason I say give yourself so much time with the prompt is because usually most themes are really easy. The relationship between a young man and his father. Okay, it's AP literature. Do you think the young man and their father are going to have a perfect, healthy, 100% loving relationship? Absolutely not. No. It's going to be complex. Do not use the word complex in your thesis. Don't say the word complex. But you should know that there's something about whatever their relationship is going to be the theme of the piece. So when you're thinking about writing your thesis statement, you need to talk about whatever that is. So that's sort of where your thesis statement should be a thematic thesis. Try not to list things like don't do something, comma something, and something. Try really hard to not do that. Don't do that. And of course, think of that subordinate clause if you can. Subordinate clause if you can. And another really important thing about your thesis statement is it doesn't have to be perfect. So remember those like phrases that I say. You can say something nearly something, or something almost something. So like if you can't really think of the right word, just put the word nearly or almost in front of it. So like you're like, wow, the only word that's coming to my brain is sinister. But this isn't really sinister, it's just kind of dark. So say dark, nearly sinister. Because you're not actually saying it is, you're saying, oh, it's almost there. So just think about ways that you don't have to be perfect and 100% correct and like right. If you're not super certain of your reading of a piece, just drop a couple things in there. It's suspenseful, almost scary. It's joyful, almost, I don't know, whatever. So you can kind of play around with that. Your thesis, really, if you don't have enough time, that should be your whole intro. Don't worry about too much. Then you have basically two choices of how you can structure your essay. It really depends on the type of passage, how you should structure it. So choice number one is you structure your essay by device. What really sucks is literally all of quarter four is just talking about how we structure our essays, but of course we didn't get a quarter four. So the first and easiest way is to structure your essay by device. So that means that in your first paragraph, you would talk about, say, point of view. And so you would talk about, oh, it's first person or whatever. It's first person, it's a limited narrator, it's whatever. Remember that point of view doesn't just mean, oh, this is first person. It also means perspective. So like, why are stories chosen to be in first person? because they want you to identify more with the character. Maybe they want to have it be limited because if it's first person, then you don't know what other people think. And so you get that sort of tension, like you don't really know what's going on. But it's also about perspective. So, if things are in first person point of view, you get that character's perspective of the world. So they might not understand things, or they might be naive, or they might be tainted by harmful experiences or whatever. So point of view and perspective go hand in hand. So that's one way you can structure your essays, by device. So each paragraph is its own device. So you just talk about point of view, or you just talk about syntax. And remember, just because these are listed in the prompt, you don't have to talk about them. You can talk about whatever you want. The second way you can structure your essay is chronological. This is my favorite way to write an essay, but it's trickier because it requires you to sort of have an outline, and you kind of have to like take time aside to think through what you're going to do, because you can't go back and really edit a chronological essay when you're timed. A device essay you can, because each paragraph is isolated. This is why essays that are device-driven essays usually aren't as good of scoring essays. They're usually limited to a 6 or a 7, versus chronological essays are usually higher level essays, because what they do is establish what's called a line of reasoning. So if you go and watch the video from our last class when I shared my essay with that prompt, you can see that I wrote what is a chronological line of reasoning. So basically what you do in this is divide the story into either thirds or halves, depending on the story. It's easier to divide it into thirds, but pay attention for if there's a shift, and that's where you definitely need to divide your discussion. And then you think about, okay, if I'm just looking at the first part of the essay, what's the most important thing that happens in the first part of the essay? So, like, for example, maybe in this excerpt, it's actually not point of view or detail or syntax. Maybe it's setting. Maybe in the first part of the essay, the setting, in the prose, the setting is so important. So your first paragraph would just be like, this passage sets up the, sinister, dark nature of the city, which leads the audience to believe that the characters might be damaged or have harmful experiences. I didn't actually read this prose passage, I'm just making stuff up. So then you could talk about the setting. And then if the next most important thing is like, there's a bunch of dialogue, so then you could talk about dialogue. Oh my God, dialogue. And so then you are really talking about their character, and you're like, but while the setting might originally lead you to believe that this is a dark and sinister place, the dialogue leads you to believe that actually these characters have found a human connection, and da-da-da-da. So see how it establishes a line of reasoning? So they build on each other. And then you could say, okay, in the last passage, I'm going to focus on point of view. Because this has been first person the whole time, we finally get the catharsis of seeing this person really come into their own and become their own person, even though they have had all these struggles or whatever. So those are the two basic ways you can outline your essay. If you have time, you definitely should try and slap in a conclusion, but it's not necessary. But your conclusion is really where you just need to tie it back to your thesis, and just say, if you kind of can think about like, why would this passage be important in our society, really? So almost think about like the effectiveness or importance. And you don't want to get too preachy. Like, don't be like, this is why we need to read books. Like, you don't want anything like that. But you might say something like, this excerpt from Johnny Got His Gun shows the audience that despite your circumstances, you can whatever, blah, 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 right? So obviously we're not looking at the actual passage, so I'm literally just making all this up. You could go and actually do this passage. It's in the schedule and you could practice. But this is sort of the good general outline. You definitely you want to front load your analysis. So spend more time analyzing than writing at the beginning of the time, which is why I say spend like a good 7 minutes at least just analyzing. Like try really hard not to start writing right away, because you might feel like that time crunch and be like, oh, I gotta write. Try to like suppress that urge in yourself, because what you want to do is understand the passage so well that you don't have to go back and reread a bunch of times. So as you're reading, you can kind of like mark in your head, like that's the first third, that's the middle third, that's the ending. And okay, so what's important in the first one? Oh, it's the word choice. Wow, the word choice is really great here. It's colloquial, it's slang, it's whatever. In the middle, oh wow, the thing that's really important here is the tone. Wow, the character's so sarcastic, whatever. So like if you kind of are already thinking about it like that, that's the best thing. One thing that I go over in this literary analysis thing, this series, like I said, you have to be logged out of your school email. You won't be able to see these if you're logged into your school email. Is basically, oh God, where's my whiteboard? If you're stuck and you don't know what things to analyze for, and let's say the prompt isn't really helpful for you, there are like 4 things that you can always look at. Setting, characterization, point of view, setting, characterization, point of view. Oh God, watch, I'm gonna have to go watch my own video on it so I remember. Don't you just hate that? When you have to look at, if I was in my classroom, I could look at my notes, but of course I don't have it. So here, I'll just show you this. So here are the things that, what the heck? There we go. Can you see this? Oh no, here we go. Of course, I'm sharing my whiteboard this whole time and then not actually showing my screen. Hopefully that made sense when you guys were watching it. So this is why, like, my little outline that I made of when you're thinking about things that you can look at for literary analysis. So the biggest thing is think about the theme and the message, and everything else builds to that theme and message. So there's 2 main things, is you can think about the author's intent and the reader's perception. So this is immediately how you can build complexity. So even if you're reading it and you're like, wow, this seems really clear cut to me, just think about the difference in those 2 things. What did the author intend, and what might a reader perceive differently? So you could easily make complexity that way. While the reader might be led to believe this, or while the author intended this to happen, the audience might actually think this, like that instantly builds complexity. So that first row below that is things that you can always talk about: setting, point of view, character, and conflict. Like no matter what you're reading, you can always talk about those things. And then that second layer is like, that's how you get that sophistication point. So if you talk about that lower level thing, if you talk about the figurative language, the word choice, the irony, the tone, the contrast, symbol, things like that, that's where you're going to move into the 7, 8, 9 essays, right? Of course, on this AP exam, they're not giving scores 1, 2, 3, 4. They're not doing that. It's, you get a 1 or you get a 0 to 5, basically. So that's a good way to think about it, is like, this is sort of like your cheat sheet of what are some things I can talk about. And then an easy way to instantly build complexity is there a rub? Like, is there some tension between what the author might have wanted and what the audience actually sees? And if not, you can also just be like, well, maybe someone somewhere would think this, right? So I don't know. Was that helpful? Does that help you out a little bit, Philip? I don't know if that's what you were looking for.